Well, it is a good morning to be a Mountaineer wherever you may be, as the West Virginia Mountaineers are coming off of a big victory over TCU, getting some sweet revenge over Jamie Dixon, and also securing a win, a needed win, a must win, and one of those wins that makes them even more comfortable for the NCAA tournament as they remained in the field before tip-off, and you got to imagine remain in the field now, back top 50 in KenPom. Nothing's a guarantee yet. You never know with this team, but a big win and an impressive showing, to say the least. Mike Asti, and I'm going to be joined, of course, by Cody Nespor here, Mountaineer Report on WVU Sports Now, another live edition of the show. We're going to talk a little bit about that win and offer you kind of a recap / what would a post-game show would have that been, since the game ended midnight, 1 a.m. for our coverage, East Coast time. And then also talk about what Rich Rodriguez had to say in one of his now many press conferences of the spring, maybe tidbits about filling the running back coach vacancy, about his mentality and what he's looking for from the players. Similar vibe to last week. We're going to hear a lot from Rich Rod. He's not still tipping his hand on anything with any position battles just yet, but he did speak. So we're going to talk about it here. Cody, how are you doing on this fine morning?
I'm good.
All right. Simple as that. I'm happy that you're doing well. And of course, we have baseball coverage that Cody's going to bring to you later on today. And again, this will be in podcast form. So Mountaineer Report offered everywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. And of course, on YouTube. Hit the notification bell for a reminder there whenever we drop it on YouTube and on the site at WV Sports Now for this show and our overall coverage. If you are listening archive-wise or podcast-wise, this was a live show, so bear in mind with that. But let's start off with the win last night. They took care of business. They withstood a 5-0 run for TCU. They did blow a game against TCU earlier in the season where they had a lead, and then TCU came back and really had an impressive victory for themselves. West Virginia not only avoids a TCU comeback, they stay the course. They remain up in double digits most of that second half. They get a convincing win. And in all intents and purposes, Cody, not only do they secure themselves, they probably pop TCU's bubble, because TCU doesn't have another opportunity for a win like that. Maybe Baylor, but probably not going to be a victory. That would have been a big win for them on the road. They don't get it. And West Virginia, with their resume, again, likely in as they've been for months, unless they almost lose out at this point, assuming maybe that UCF win for the home finale to end the season. But they do have a couple hard games coming up on the road. What are your thoughts now from covering the game? Where are you now? I know you didn't want to lock them into the tournament when we did the show a few days ago. Are they now a lock? Where are they on your secure meter for the tournament?
Yeah. It ends up, last night ends up being like a kind of a sneaky, huge game. Because you figure in these last four, to feel really good about making the tournament, you win 2 of them.
Right.
And so to win the first home game before this 2-game road swing out to Utah, it ends up being massive. And Coach DeVries talked about that. It sets you up really well for these last 3 games, where if they had lost, they'd be in a really tough position.
Trouble. They'd almost need to win out at that point, I would think.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, TCU's probably done now, unless they go on a miracle, Big 12 tournament run.
Sure.
But yeah, it ends up being a huge game, and the team played great, in all honesty. You're nervous for those first 2 minutes, and that's, Jamie Dixon came out with a really aggressive defensive plan, and it bothered West Virginia for about 5 possessions, and then they kind of just figured it out and went on that 18-point run, and the game was over from there. Yep. And then even in the second half at the end, TCU cuts it to 9, and you start to feel like, oh, is WVU going to blow it? Right. But then, the Horned Frogs don't make another shot for the last 5.5 minutes, and West Virginia really slams the door. So it's just a really good win. And it's one of those things where they shot extremely well for the first time in months. And, DeVries kind of talked about it like he just on Monday morning, he talked about like there's still an offensive breakout in this team. And you think, if they can keep that shooting, if they're confident now, they go out to
Yeah.
Utah, win one of those, come back home, win one of those. And then,
Right.
it doesn't erase the last few weeks that have been, down, but it alleviates a lot of that. It gets them in the tournament pretty much for sure. And you want to be playing your best right now. And if
Yeah.
that carries on, you'd feel really, really good about them.
Yeah, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti, Mountaineer Report here, WV Sports Now. The Mountaineers did get again, I think the term is convincing win. They got a convincing win, which is what they needed to impress the committee here, who's been keeping them on that right side of the bubble for a while. Whether you go to CBS, Lenardi, Andy Katz, they've been in for 3 months. I think you and I and many who cover this program have been trying to preach that the fans' comments of, well, they just don't feel like a tournament team or they got to do this to get on the right side of the bubble. They've been on the right side of the bubble. The difference is a couple months ago, if you didn't have this recent losing skid, literally to start the year, they were flirting with a 2 seed by some bracketologists, and they were 4, 6 at the worst at that point with those big wins. And you could argue, now there's going to be a legitimate case for some of the naysayers to argue that 3 top 10 wins are 3 top 10 wins, but Kansas is having a down year, their most down year in 20 years. Gonzaga, when's the last time Gonzaga's been on any kinds of bubble? Literally, I don't think of our lifetime, either one of us, and I'm older than you. Certainly not under Mark Few at all. So it's been a long time, and those wins maybe don't carry the weight they were at the time, but they're still on the resume. The 4 ranked wins are still good, still a better resume than anybody else in the bubble. They've been in, but it almost felt like they were getting bumps for, I don't know, for Rand Pashella and others were doing them favors or whatever. They didn't feel like a tournament team. They only were getting there because the rest of the bubble didn't feel like tournament teams either, and their resume. Now, the way they're playing a little bit more recently, it even includes losing in overtime to Baylor, but kind of playing well. They did get the victory over Cincinnati that they almost blew, but they did win it. That's now 2 over them. Then you get this revenge over TCU. You're able to kind of say, okay, you win at home, you lose on the road. Big 12's tough, both bubble teams, etc. Now you're feeling more secure. I do think that they do need to win one of those games on the road in Utah, BYU in Utah, and one of them now is against former Mountaineer and Josh Eilert, as funny as that is, as he now will get credit for that winner loss. He didn't get credit for the loss earlier in the season now. But I do think, Cody, based on everything I just said there, if they would lose both of those games but win convincingly like this against UCF to cap it off and then go in the Big 12 tournament and at least do something, they would still get in. They continuously get that benefit of the doubt because this is the ceiling in how the team can play, especially without Tucker DeVries. And again, that was – for as much as Darren DeVries could be a Big 12 coach of the year and has been a candidate at times, and it looked like he was puttering that away, he coached his, what off against TCU. It again looked like he outcoached his opponent. And we talked about how funny that is, Cody. You even mentioned it. After the TCU loss, Jamie Dixon outcoached him. This looked like he outcoached Jamie Dixon. It almost looked like Jamie Dixon. I saw he was laughing in the postgame presser. He was talking to Javon Small. You know what it felt like? It felt like a veteran coach knew, like, season's over. Like, this is the end of the line. Like he kind of knew, like, this is it for us. It was almost like a season wrap. What was his vibe? So that's also a big deal. And maybe they go from a 10 seed. Hopefully, it doesn't push them away from being so close to home for our coverage. But maybe it takes them away from being a 10 seed to more of that 7-8 if they can win out and they can do something in the tournament. I do want to ask you, though, because this has been a topic that Darren DeVries has brought up a lot recently, that all of us have been talking about how they need to be more consistent on offense. They can't rely on Small. He had 23 in the game. Double-doubles galore are great, but they need even more production from Hansberry and Joseph. They've stepped up recently, but they need more in terms of offensive efficiency. But do you think it's a bigger deal that all of that happened, or what else Darren DeVries has talked about? Because he's also said that part of the losing skid has been about them not being good enough defensively. And a lot of our eyes opened, we're writing about offense, and he's saying, no, I'm more upset about the defense. Defense also obviously played well. TCU got hot a couple weeks ago. They couldn't do it in this game. Bigger deal that offense finally clicked and was efficient, or a bigger deal that they had a really, really strong defensive showing that if they play like that defensively, they might beat anybody?
Yeah, and you're right. After that first TCU game, I was as critical of Darren as I've been all year.
Yeah.
And he did, I still maintain he got out coached in that game. But credit where credit's due, he kind of took Jamie Dixon to the woodshed last night. Like up until this, later in the second half when TCU put the press on, that was the first thing that really kind of worked for them, and it sparked their run where they cut it to 9. But obviously that still wasn't enough.
Too late.
It was a really, really good. Like I said, like the first 2 minutes, TCU looked like it had advantage. WVU made one adjustment, and it was kind of over from there. So big credit to Darren. And I think in terms of offense or defense, it's this team maybe more so than most or any other team. They're so connected on both ends. Just because they're so much better in transition than they are in the half court on offense. And they're so much better kind of playing defense after makes, right? They're so much better in the half court defense than in transition defense. So it really plays together more so than usually happens for teams. And it's obvious. It happens in a game like this where when they get stops, the offense generally is good. We've seen that all year. And when they're scoring and especially making threes, the defense is good. And that's why this team, even like half to half, it's why this team is kind of so volatile, because when they go through one of those scoring slumps, we see other teams take advantage and go on big runs just because the two ends are so connected. And that's what, it's the 3-point shooting. If it stays even anywhere near like they did last night, it really helps on both ends. And same
That
with
might
defense,
be a lot to ask.
But it is, but it's, same with defense. It's like, as long as another team isn't shooting 60% and a half, that gives their offense a chance. And it's really weird. Like I said, not a lot of teams are as connected as this one are, but that goes to like, the limitations they have in the half court offense and the depth stuff they have. But that's the reality. And when it all works like it did last night, it looks really good and they look really good. And when it doesn't work, like at Texas Tech, it looks really bad, and they look really bad.
Yeah. And coming off that performance, this is a really great performance, because even because all honesty, Cody, I was really interested to see what Andy Cass, Joe Lenardi did after that performance. And again, they stayed the course. It almost is like they left that be a mulligan game. And that it did feel like that, okay, the Texas Tech game on the road was a game where they could only help themselves. And that bared it out from what the national media was saying. Obviously, a win would have locked them up, would have been a big deal. Maybe they moved seed line wise. You get destroyed, and it's like, okay, that's quad one on the road. Texas Tech's a top 10 team. 4 top 10 wins would have been the first time in a pretty good program's history. Leave it go. It's almost like they forgot about it. But then they wouldn't have forgot about it if you either lose or even barely beat TCU. I think winning the way they did allowed them to say, okay, that was just a bad road trip. And yeah, they are really connected all over the place. Maybe that's why DeVries is saying defense more than offense, and we're arguing offense, and other people are saying offense. It's going back and forth, because if one's not going, the other's not going, and that was the issue in some of their losses. I don't know if they're always going to play like they did against TCU, or even 90% of the Cincinnati game before they almost blew it, which is what maybe kind of looked like was happening in the last 7, 8, 9 minutes against TCU, and then they turned it on again and had the mental fortitude to still get a big time win. But Small had his best game in a while. And they also did it to their credit, Cody, and this is no excuse, but a 9 p.m. tip off, and I wasn't there. I was watching on TV. Every player left for at least a minute or two for a cramping issue. That was all a part of the national broadcast with CBS. I don't know necessarily if that was as evident to you on press row, but if they lost, that was clearly what CBS was trying to pump as the story of the game. And then West Virginia kept getting up by so much that was kind of forgotten. And again, West Virginia gets the win. I always said 18 wins with that resume and all the top 10 wins and ranked wins would get them in just barely, probably 19 to 100%. Anything more when you include the conference tournament, then you're really sitting pretty and probably move into a better seed line. And they have that in front of them. The only thing that jumps out in my mind when you're talking about doing this against a team as long as they don't start shooting the lights out and don't have a great offensive clip. BYU is a team that can do that. And they've already beat West Virginia once. That does feel like a bad matchup. And even though Utah is disappointing and they fired a coach, maybe Eiler's cooking something up and he's motivated, even though there's no hard feelings there. There's no gimmies there. But I do think as long as you win one more, they would crawl in. And certainly if you split those upcoming games, they would be fine. But a loss to TCU would have been devastating, but they do get the win. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, WV Sports Now. Not going to make this too long of a show. Again, Cody's baseball coverage is coming up today. Home opener at Kendrick Family Ballpark. First one with that name on the facility, and the undefeated Mountaineers are looking to keep that going now, getting into more of the heartbeat of that schedule that maybe gets them nationally ranked. I don't know if you got a chance to watch Rich Rod's press conference. I was there. Number one, any takeaways from this one? We're going to get him almost every other day, so that's kind of an overlying question right now, and what we're really going to hear from him. He's going to be close to the vest, obviously, in early spring. Any comments on what you heard from him just in general, or even in particular about it? Definitely now feels like they're going outside for the running back coach situation, even though he did say that Travis Trickett and Noah Devine are working with the running backs without one right now. But it's almost like, and maybe he's trying to play coy with me in particular, but he dismisses it and it continuously mentions going outside and they're going to hire a real good one, is always the quote. So I don't know who that is then. There's not much reporting or speculation on who that would be on the outside. I will be honest. I don't know who that would be right now, but your thoughts on Rich Rod recent comments.
Yeah, I think and we talked about it when it happened. This is a weird time to be looking for a position coach.
I mean, I don't even want to be sourcing who that is now. It's almost like this isn't the time. Like, it's hard to get in that mindset right now. Yeah.
Because like everybody's getting into spring ball, so
right.
And it's like I don't know who's out there jobless that's available. I don't know who's out there in a lower position available to poach.
You can poach somebody, and then you're in this cycle again, and eventually we'll have musical chairs, and will one program not have any running back coach because somebody's gonna we keep stealing everybody's coach, right?
So it is like it just has to be a wait and see, just from timing of when it happened. And then I don't know what Richard. Richard, I don't want to say he played the hits, but he says all the things to get the fan base.
We're getting some repeats. This was a little less than before. He didn't go into the I'm smarter now than I would have been last year and 20 years ago. He didn't give that full speech.
But he says the stuff like, if we're keeping score, we're gonna whip ass. And
that was funny. Like, that's a quote right there.
It's like
fans gotta like that.
That's what he's still kind of playing up to even though there wasn't a crowd
material, and he's given reason for even fans that don't like him to be okay. I love this quote. Let me put it on my social media. He's doing that, which it's annoying a little bit to cover, but I do think because he left so controversially that he's probably the one coach in America that does need to do this because he is making more people like him. If you just see posts, the more he says things like that, even people that didn't like him before. So he might. I'm sure his daughter, who's big on social media, and that's part of her job there, she's probably telling him this works, this doesn't work, this works, keep on doing this. And he's doing what works. But yeah, it's getting to be the same thing, especially when we hear from him every other day.
Yeah. He did. I mean, I'd rather get your take on it. He did go a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of, kind of the roster and how the offense is going to work and so I'd rather get kind of your thoughts on it of, it was a little bit more in depth this time than previously, and he did kind of go into more detail.
Yeah, and I wrote about it a little bit on the site, and it is more detail certainly than last Thursday or any of the pre-spring pressers, or it was just all hoopla from McAfee on to national shows. Yeah, he did mention number one, which I think is going to be new for a lot of Mountaineer fans. You saw a little bit of this the last couple of years under Neil Brown, but it's a totally different offense than what Neil Brown was running now, and Rich Rod didn't really do it 20 years ago. He's going to be using tight ends in the offense. They're not going to just be blockers. He is going to utilize tight ends as weapons pass catching tight ends will be a thing under Rich Rod. That wasn't really the case before. He's claimed how he's adjusted his offense. And Cody, the first thing that jumped out at me, and I put it in the story, okay, that's great, but Colt Taylor's graduated. You don't have that guy. Based on the resume, the people that he brought in via transfers or even that are still there, they're all blocking tight ends. He got one from a power 4, but that's a blocking tight end. So, yes, there's some resume of having done it in high school for those players, like Jacob Barrick who was following him from Jacksonville State, but that's now 2-3 years ago for those guys. He mostly has blocking tight ends, but he's going to utilize them in the passing game. That'll be interesting how that works. He also did let everybody know that, yeah, Jaheim's a gigantic deal, of course. He kind of poo-pooed the whole thing of, what's the vibe for Jaheim, which I think he's going to have to get used to those questions, Cody. I don't know if you've noticed. He gets a little irritated a little bit when you ask those things. I think he just gives coaches come and go, players come and go. I get it, but what I was trying to tell him, this is a 19-year-old who's never gone through it before, and I didn't tell him, but he went on Instagram and pretty much alluded to being upset 2 days earlier. I don't know how much Rich Rod's checking those things. I'm sure, again, his daughter is, but I think we needed a vibe check for Jaheim because you could easily go from a winning year to not if you lose him and you got to spring portal up. But aside from just Jaheim, he mentioned he's going to go 3 running backs deep. So we talked a lot about Jalen Anderson staying and having CJ and Jaheim really be that 1-2 punch, and Jalen Anderson not getting involved but staying in the past under Brown. It sounds like he's going to go more than 1-2 punch. It sounds like ideally for Rich Rod, if they win, he's going to be using 3 running backs, and the third guy's going to get some time to where he has tape on film beyond the FCS game. That's also what that sounds like. And it also is a little interesting that he admitted that, including Rodney Gallagher, no receiver has anything locked up, whether they're inside or outside right now, which is odd because Rodney Gallagher himself, certainly in the past, and kind of Rich Rod even alluded to this, and maybe, again, he's dancing around it with us and kind of tipped his hand weeks ago, but the Rodney Gallagher is clearly going to be his inside guy. Blaine Stewart, when he got hired as the inside guy and moved from tight end to inside guy, Cody, he put Rodney Gallagher in his pictures on X with pass grade inside guys. And now Rich Rod's saying that I don't care how tall or small you are or short or big or whatever your body type is. I'm trying everybody everywhere. We're not going to know anyone's inside, outside until the fall. Again, it would be shell-shocking if Rodney Gallagher's not an inside guy. But outside of that, with Cam Vaughn and others, you really don't know anyone's position, who's going to be, if there is a number one, who's going to be inside, outside. A lot of question marks. And in this recent presser, he didn't go into as much about the quarterback battle because we got a decent amount when he talked the other day. Again, I from my sourcing, Nico Markio's getting paid a little bit more from Country Road Trust. If that's a big deal to you, I think he might be in pole position because of that, from what I'm hearing. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if Jalen Henderson impresses him and ends up being the starter. And then I still do stand by what I wrote a few weeks ago, that he's building this 5-man deep quarterback room that he keeps saying how much he loves the depth to protect himself from somebody possibly transferring in the spring and still having, say, a Max Brown there, whoever, at that point. So it's kind of where the roster stands now. But even defensively, he mentioned that Zac Alley, I think he said, and maybe it's an exaggeration, that he ran 10 blitzes in day 1 of spring practice. The pass rush was actually the only thing that kind of was good last year, but if they're going to be that wild, I mean, if you're going to be seeing exotic blitzes, that many blitzes, it seems like they're going to have a lot of blitzes administered, and Zac Alley is a big blitz guy. It almost feels like it could be a really devastating, powerful defense, or it could be the other end. And the important part, again, is the secondary, because if you're going to be blitzing and the quarterback gets the pass off, your secondary has to be good. It has not been good, certainly last year, but not even in recent years. It's kind of where the situation stands. But of course, as we're speaking on Wednesday, we're going to hear from the man again tomorrow. And I don't. We're getting to the point almost it's too much, unless he's going to give us some depth chart or some more. We'll see what he says there. But
that's like a few years ago, we would talk to Huggins like 4 times a week, and we would just run out of things to ask him. Absolutely, he did. He loved just sitting around and telling stories.
But he always would try to make it clear, like through other people or even with the fans' belief that Huggins hates the media, he's this
Yeah,
surly guy. He actually liked that conversation 100%, and I think he
absolutely.
misses us a little bit. But yeah, it almost seems like Rich Rod's a little bit of that Huggins vibe, where like the vibe of him is Rich Rod hard nosed, hard edge, hates media,
Yeah.
but he loves talking to the media.
He
He
kind of
sets
does.
the schedule. This is him. He's not being forced to do this. He's talking
Yeah.
more than anybody else. And I will tell the fans, it does feel like we're going to be hearing from Rich Rod 90% of the time, and probably nobody else, at all. At least through spring. Zac Alley talked once. That's the schedule right now. There is no other player or assistant coach on this current schedule. We'll let you know when there is one. So I would like to talk to somebody besides Rich Rod. Not that I don't enjoy the Rich Rod convo, but that's what we have right now. Is there anything that you want to hear more from Rich Rod as we get close to wrapping this show up that we're not
Yeah.
yet hearing from Rich Rod? I mean, he doesn't want to give too much, but in a perfect world, outside of just saying this guy's QB1, what would you like to hear from him?
Um, honestly, I think the more interesting storyline right now has to do with Alley.
Sure, 100%. I liked hearing from
Because
him.
like
Yeah,
you said, we're going to hear from Rich Rod so much, and he's largely going to talk about offense. And I think, and
yeah,
I don't know, get your take on it. As much pressure as Rich Rod's going to be under, like, I feel like Alley's going to be under a bunch of pressure too, kind of
yeah.
sneakily, because
We
he had
talked
one
about it on the last
year.
show, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
he had 1 year as a coach DC at Oklahoma, and everybody's touting it as they poached a guy from Oklahoma, but he was only there for 1 year, and they weren't great last year. So
They're not even replacing him. They're not even
so
replacing him,
it's
which is crazy.
so I mean, I think Allie has a lot to prove. And you're right. Yeah, the last show I did talk about it. Like he's the guy I kind of want to hear from, because he's touted as this young up and comer, like could potentially be the future head coach.
Right.
And I mean, that's all speculation still. So that's like, to
Oh,
me,
I think
to
the
me,
tea
he's the
leaves are
more
there.
interesting guy this spring, and sneakily this, obviously Rich Rod's gonna get all the
Yeah.
headlines, but like Allie's really interesting to me, and I hope we do end up getting a lot of him and hear from him.
Well, just going off headlines, the only coach, obviously local media is covering everything, and Chad's got some of that, and maybe is an argument with his departure. But the only coach who got national headlines since Rich Rod was announced to now is Zac Alley. The
Yeah,
national media didn't care about anybody else on the staff, but they were all over Zac Alley being plucked out of Oklahoma, to a shock of most of them, to what they put out there public, and even what I've talked to some of them about. It was a surprising thing. They do think it kind of means the beginning of the end for the Oklahoma program as being a legit blue blood and all of that. I mean, that's where you're connecting there. And I do agree that Zac Alley has a lot of pressure on him because he's that young coach. Rich Rod obviously has pressure to win right now. You can't go 3-8 like you did 20 years ago. I get all that. And if he has a great run, he can get in the College Football Hall of Fame, maybe. I said it before. If you look at his resume and win percentage wise, I do think a great run would get him there. A bad run would not. And I think his legacy would never be repaired at WVU. And I do think Wren is an outside AD who's trying to win and do the right thing. He would fire him within a couple years if they're not making bowl games at minimum. So I don't think this is. I always compare it to like when Joe Gibbs went back to Washington in the NFL with the then Redskins. I don't. This isn't like they weren't great, but they just refused to fire him, and they defended him at every stop because of three rings from decades earlier. That's not going to be this. That's not going to be this. If they're losing games left and right, I don't think it's going to continuously be, Rich Rod's our savior because he did leave so poorly. So there's a lot of pressure there. A lot of pressure there. The Pitt game's on September 13th, etc. But Zac Alley, he even said literally that he believes Rich Rod is grooming him to be a head coach somewhere. And that tells you two things, Cody. Tells you two things. Number one, yes, he was plucked from Oklahoma, but he's at WVU going with Rich Rod to clearly put almost more resume tape out there that if they go ahead and make the playoff, Zac Alley's probably a head coach in the Power Four next year. Like he could be that highly coveted if the defense really turns around, and he knows that he wants to be a head coach someday. He's probably not going to be a DC at West Virginia for the next 5 years. He's not going to be there this entire Rich Rod contract if it goes well. And the other end of it is, Cody, if you want to keep him and Ren loves him and Rich Rod loves him and that connection's there, I think you're also getting hints at, and this is the tea leaves that I was talking about, that if he is staying at West Virginia and they're winning, they are clearly giving him whispers and grooming him to take over for Rich Rod whenever Rich Rod, probably if they're winning and this 5 years is over, he then would retire. And if it's going well and Zac is somehow still there, hand the keys to the DC that helped win a Big 12 title. And I think that would be sold to fans, and Zac Alley then would still be very young. That would be the only way I think he'd be convinced to stay there if they're winning versus taking another job that probably will be offered at some point in there as soon as next offseason. So there's a lot of pressure that obviously, if the defense sucks and it goes really poorly and the offense is probably going to score, win or lose, if the defense holds them back like happened in 2024, then I don't think Zac Alley has prospects in the Power Four next offseason. He might stay, but it's only because he doesn't have the great options elsewhere. Maybe fans would turn on him and want him fired. And if he is fired, he would go from ascending to being the next man up, to being groomed for the new job at West Virginia, or even getting another job elsewhere, to losing his value. And West Virginia would say, we were grooming you, but then defense was one of the worst in the country again. So now you're gone. Like he had a lot of pressure. His year could go 180 real quick. So that's a big deal. And that's definitely a storyline. We don't know exactly when we're going to hear from him. I also think he's clearly really good with the media. He was fine and very comfortable when we talked to him. So I think he wouldn't be against talking more. But that is a storyline that almost no one is writing, including myself. We have to get on it. That we talked about on the show. But yeah, he has a lot of pressure. I mean, no one's going to have more pressure than Rich Rod. And I think if we had to rank it, it's probably Rich Rod. Well, not hypothetically, but it's literally Rich Rod, and then hypothetically, whoever's the QB1, because it was Nico the incumbent, and he sticks with him over a Power 4 transfer, or even brings in a Power 4 transfer over the guy who stayed around, that guy. And then maybe Zac Alley, you could argue those two. It's probably where the pressure is, for sure. And again, we will see what is said here in a couple days. But yeah, Zac Alley is an interesting story, 100%. And I do also find it interesting that Zac Alley doesn't feel like he feels any pressure. Rich Rod doesn't feel like he feels any pressure. The vibe of everybody with the program is very laid back, calm, cool, collected. Yeah, coaches go, coaches come, players go, players come. We're coaching them up. We're not there yet, but we're going to ascend. You know, if this guy leaves, we're going to find the next Steve Slayton, etc. I even had somebody tell me when we were leaving the presser, about the Jaheim situation. Well, if he does leave, he wants 3 running backs, and we don't know the next Jaheim that's already on this roster, because no matter where Rich Rod's been, win or lose, the guys that end up being contributors are not stars going in. Jaheim would actually be a star going in, so maybe that next star is already on this roster that we don't know is a star yet. Maybe he coaches them up and finds somebody. So that's all in play too, that I think maybe is in play more now than with Brown. I think that's one major advantage Rich Rod as coach versus Neil Brown, to be fair here, is Rich Rod has a track record, Cody, no matter where he's been 20 years to now, from WVU to Jacksonville State and even before and in the middle, that he can elevate and get the most out of the current roster, whether the current roster is great, average, or bad. Whereas Neil Brown, it did feel like if he's hampered by money, if he's hampered by the roster, a couple years ago when he dealt with the mass exodus of players, etc., then it almost sounded like Neil Brown was trying to sell to fans excuse making, that I'm screwed by money, I'm screwed by this isn't fair, etc. And again, some of that with the schedule and the money was less, I do think actually were legitimate excuses, but he did sell a lot of excuses. Whereas Rich Rod, I think part of why the fans like this hire a little bit more is no matter what happens, he takes it on the chin, and it seems like he has full confidence to coach the next guy up, even if the next guy is a 3, 2, or 1 star. And he's proven to get something out of those players, maybe more than Neil Brown ever could out of non-elite talent. So if that's the case, then maybe he is the best coach for the program. Like maybe if you're never going to get the top 5 star, maybe Rich Rod's the best coach to get the next Pat White, Steve Slayton out of a 3-star player, because they were not 5 stars coming in either. Maybe Brown would never get the most out of those guys if he's never going to get that top flight talent. So that's kind of glass half full take for Rich Rod, but obviously the glass half empty is there's a lot of work to do. No position is secure. The spring portal still in front. Guys could start not liking hard edge and could leave. Nothing's guaranteed. Maybe he's getting too laissez-faire with it. Like, Jaheim, he's fine. People lose coaches. And I think you need to have a little bit of conversation with the man.
Mm-hmm.
He did also mention that Jaheim's banged up. If you notice that, he keeps dropping in. He's banged up. I don't know how, we haven't seen it. I don't know how much he's practicing. I don't think that much. He is banged up. He keeps saying he's fine, but hard to do reporting without being out there. We haven't had a open media availability yet to see practice, but banged up is the terminology. So that'll do it for this edition here, this live edition of Mountaineer Report. Again, find us on YouTube, hit the notification bell, find our full coverage of all Mountaineer athletics and West Virginia sports in general, including the TBT back in Charleston. Not as close for me as the last few years, but back in Charleston nonetheless. For all of that, WV Sports Now, of course, find us on social and also find us everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. And we are now full steam ahead, clearly, to a very hectic, a very busy spring, with maybe a great spring for WVU fans, whether it be football, spring ball, men's team in the tournament, women's team in the tournament. Baseball right now hasn't lost the game as we're speaking. That's all going on. And, not many programs in the country can say there's that much going on positively right now in athletics of their program. I do, again, think WVU is one of the more underrated athletic programs overall. And no one says that nationally because football has been down. You get football up again, they're back elevating as one of the top 10 athletic programs nationally. And if you look at how everyone's competing and throughout all of Mountaineer athletics, that would absolutely be the case.